He raised his hand in front of everyone, the neighbors, the coworkers, the people who smiled at him in church every Sunday, and he brought it down across my face like I was nothing. Not because I had done something terrible. Not because I broke something or cost him money or caused any real harm. He hit me because I gave him a birthday gift he didn't think was expensive enough. That was the moment. That one instant. The instant my cheek went numb and the room went completely silent. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of what would happen if I walked away. Because I finally understood, staying was worse. My name is Nora. I'm 22 years old. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of how one slap, witnessed by 31 people at a birthday party, became the first piece of evidence in a court case that stripped a man of everything he thought he owned. Including me. But before I get into all of that, I need to take you back. Back to the morning of that birthday. Back to where my story really begins, in a house that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a prison from the inside. Before we go any further, if you've ever felt like you were treated as less than in your own home, like you were there to serve but never truly belong, this channel is for you. Every day, we bring you real stories of people who found their voice after years of silence, people who turned their pain into power. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We upload every single day. You do not want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get back to Nora. Vincent Caldera turned 54 that October. He was the kind of man who kept his car washed even in winter, who shook hands too firmly and laughed too loudly and made sure everyone in the room knew exactly how successful he considered himself to be. He had a wife, Patricia, who wore pearls to casual dinners and called her own opinion just the sensible thing. He had a son, Marcus, 26, who still lived at home because Vincent paid all his bills and Marcus had never been asked to pay a single one himself. And then there was me. Nora. The one who was different. I wasn't their biological child. I came into their home when I was 4 years old after my mother, Vincent's younger sister, died from illness. There were no other relatives willing to take me in. So Vincent and Patricia stepped forward, signed the paperwork, and I became theirs on paper. On paper. In reality, I became the household's extra set of hands. By the time I was 9, I was waking up before everyone else to prepare breakfast. By 12, I was managing the grocery lists and the laundry schedule. By 16, I had a part-time job at a bakery, not because I wanted to build savings or independence, but because Vincent told me I needed to contribute to the household. I gave him $40 from every paycheck. He kept a logbook. He called it teaching me responsibility. I called it something else, but I didn't have words for it back then. Marcus never contributed. Marcus got a car for his 18th birthday. I got a bus pass that expired after 2 months because no one renewed it. That was the house I grew up in. Clean walls, good furniture, a manicured front garden, and underneath all of it, a set of rules that only applied to one person. Me. I want you to understand what it took to buy that gift. For 3 months, I had been setting aside money from my shifts at the bakery. Not the $40 I gave Vincent. My own money, the part that was supposed to be mine. I skipped lunches. I walked instead of taking the bus. I said no to every small comfort that came up in those 12 weeks. I saved $87. And with that money, I bought Vincent a leather-bound journal, the kind he'd mentioned once, casually, while watching a documentary about writers. He said he'd always wanted to put his thoughts down somewhere meaningful. I remembered. I always remembered everything he said. I wrapped it carefully. I wrote on the card. I was proud of it. The party was in the backyard. 31 guests. String lights, catered food, good wine. Patricia had been planning it for weeks. My job was to make sure the kitchen stayed clean, the appetizer platters were refilled, and the drinks never ran empty. Same as always, invisible but essential. When the gift opening happened, I stepped forward. I placed the package on the table in front of him. He picked it up and I watched his expression, the way you watch someone you have spent your whole life trying to please. Hoping. Still, after all those years, hoping. He tore the paper, held it up, looked at it for a long moment. Then he said, loud enough for every single person at that party to hear, "This is what you call a gift? You've been living under my roof for 18 years and this is what I'm worth to you?" People shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. I opened my mouth to explain. That I had saved. That I had remembered what he said about journals. That it had meaning. He didn't let me finish. His hand came across the side of my face before I even saw it move. The sound was sharp and flat all at once. My head turned sideways. A glass fell off the edge of the table and shattered on the patio stones. And then, silence. No one said a word. Not Patricia. Not Marcus, who was filming something on his phone from across the yard. Not a single one of the 31 guests. I stood there with my hand pressed against my cheek and something cold and very clear settling into my chest. Not just pain. Not just humiliation. Something like a decision forming. I turned around and walked through the back door, through the kitchen I had cleaned that morning, and into the small room at the end of the hallway that was the closest thing I had to my own space. I took my backpack off the shelf. I put in what mattered. And I left. I didn't have a plan. I had a backpack, a bruise forming along my cheekbone, and $230 in a zipped pocket, money I had never told Vincent about because I had learned early that things you want to keep, you keep hidden. I walked for about 40 minutes before my phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. But the name on the screen stopped me. Deborah Watts. Deborah was my old school counselor, the one who had pulled me aside in 10th grade and asked quietly if everything was okay at home. I had said yes, because back then I was still convinced that what was happening to me was normal. But we had stayed in touch. She checked in every few months. She never pressed. She just stayed present. Nora. I heard what happened. Are you safe? Someone at the party had texted her. I don't know who. I didn't ask. Within an hour, I was sitting in Deborah's kitchen with a cup of tea I couldn't quite hold steady, and she was across from me with a notepad, not to take notes, just because she said writing things down helped her think. She had already called someone. A woman named Yvette Carroll, a family law paralegal who happened to be Deborah's neighbor, who knocked on the door 40 minutes later and sat down at the table like she belonged there. Yvette didn't waste any time. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. Every detail you can remember. So I did. And as I talked, I watched her expression change, not dramatically, not in a way that felt performed, but in the way a professional's face changes when they recognize something. When the pieces start to fit a shape they've seen before. When I finished, she asked one question: did you ever receive any money, any financial support, directly, for yourself? Anything you could call your own? I thought about it. Then I shook my head. She nodded slowly. He was receiving a kinship care stipend for you from the state. Has been since you were 4. It's around $620 a month. I stared at her. 18 years, she said, doing the math out loud. That's over $130,000, Nora. Paid by the state for your welfare. And based on everything you've just told me, it wasn't used for your welfare. The number sat in the air between us like something heavy and sharp. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Yvette said, that we have a case. The next 2 weeks were the quietest and most intense of my life. I stayed in Deborah's spare room. She never made me feel like a burden, not once, not in any of the small invisible ways people do when they secretly want you to move on. She just made up the bed and left a key on the counter and said, stay as long as you need. Yvette connected me with a family law attorney named Harold Finn, a soft-spoken man in his late 50s who had spent decades working on child welfare cases. He reviewed my file within 48 hours and scheduled a meeting at his office, which smelled like old books and had a clock on the wall that ticked just loud enough to remind you that time mattered. Here is what we have, Harold said, spreading documents across his desk like he was laying out the bones of something. And here is what we're going to build. The kinship stipend records were the foundation. Through a formal request, we obtained the payment history from the state's child welfare office, every disbursement, every month, going back to when I was 4 years old. The total was $133,840. This money, Harold explained, was legally designated for your care. Food, clothing, medical, education, housing appropriate for a child. We're going to compare what the state paid with what you actually received. What I actually received, a shared bedroom until Marcus turned 16 and took the larger room, pushing me to the smallest space in the house. No medical appointments after age 13 because Vincent said doctors were for when something's actually wrong. No school trips. No extracurriculars that cost money. Clothes bought once a year at end-of-season sales, the kind that were 2 sizes too large so they'd last longer. Yvette found 3 neighbors who had quietly observed, over the years, the pattern in that household. How Marcus came and went freely while I was always working. How the front garden I tended was credited to Patricia at the neighborhood association meetings. How Deborah herself, who had known me since 10th grade, had never once seen Vincent or Patricia attend a school event for me. Not a graduation. Not a sports day. Nothing. And then there was the photograph. One of the party guests, a woman named Claire who had no loyalty to Vincent and a lot of conscience, had caught the slap on video. She hadn't planned to. She'd been filming a short clip of the garden lights. But there it was. Clear, time-stamped, undeniable, Vincent Caldera's hand connecting with the face of a 22-year-old woman who had handed him a gift. Claire handed over the footage voluntarily. No persuasion needed. She said she had barely slept since the night of the party. Harold looked at the footage once, nodded once, and said, "We're ready." Let me pause right here for just a second, because I need to ask you something. If you were in Nora's position, with $130,000 worth of evidence sitting in a file folder, and the man who hurt you had no idea what was coming, what would you do? Would you confront him first? Would you walk away quietly and let the courts handle it? Drop your answer in the comments right now. And while you're down there, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this. Okay. Back to Nora, because things are about to get very interesting. He filed a missing person report 4 days after the party. Not because he was worried. I know that now. He filed it because he was calculating. Because he had told people at that party that I was fragile. That I had struggles. He wanted to establish a narrative before the real one caught up with him. The responding officer called Deborah's number, which I had listed as my emergency contact 2 years earlier. The officer confirmed I was a legal adult who had left voluntarily. Vincent's report went nowhere. But he didn't stop there. He showed up at the bakery where I worked. My manager, a woman named Grace who had known me for 3 years, came to find me in the back and said quietly, "There's a man at the counter. Says he's your father. He doesn't look friendly." I told Grace the short version. Just enough. She nodded, went back out, and told Vincent that I was not on shift that day and that he should not come back to the premises for personal matters. When he raised his voice, she told him she would call the police if he didn't leave. He left. That evening, I received a letter. Hand-delivered to Deborah's address, which told me he'd had someone follow me. The letter was on his business stationery. He ran a mid-sized property management company, and it was written in the tone of a man who still believed he controlled the situation. It said I was being manipulated by outside parties. It said that if I came home and resolved this matter privately, he would consider the incident at the party forgiven. He used the word forgiven. Like he was the injured party. He said I owed him. I read the letter once. Then I placed it in a clear plastic sleeve and handed it to Harold the next morning. Harold read it, slid it into the evidence folder, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Caldera. That'll be Exhibit 7. The hardest part of building a case isn't always the documents. Sometimes it's the people. People who watched things happen and stayed quiet, not because they were cruel, but because they were scared. Because Vincent Caldera was the kind of man who made people feel that speaking up came with a cost. But that changes when the tide shifts. When people see that someone is actually going to court. When they realize the choice is no longer between speaking and staying comfortable, but between speaking and becoming complicit. The first person who came forward was a woman named Eleanor Voss. She had lived 2 doors down from the Caldera house for 11 years. She told Harold's paralegal that she had watched me, from the time I was around 8 or 9, taking out the rubbish bins alone before school on winter mornings. She had seen me shoveling the driveway. She had asked Patricia once, casually, why Nora seemed to do so much of the heavy work. Patricia had smiled and said I liked to keep busy. Eleanor said she had never believed that. But she hadn't asked again. The second was the man who had catered the party, a quiet, careful person named Jerome who told us that in the 2 hours before guests arrived, he had watched me arrange the entire outdoor setup alone. He had offered to help me carry chairs. I had thanked him but said I wasn't supposed to let the help from outside touch the furniture. Those were Vincent's instructions. Jerome remembered that because he had found it strange. And he had remembered the slap because he was still in the kitchen when it happened and had heard the sound through the window. I should have said something that night, he told Harold's office. I've been thinking about it ever since. And then there was Marcus. I didn't expect Marcus. I want to be honest about that. I did not expect Marcus to call Harold's office and ask for a meeting. He was 26 years old and had spent his entire life on the comfortable side of the line that divided our household. I had no reason to believe he would cross it now. But he did. He came in wearing the kind of expression that doesn't have a clean name, somewhere between guilt and relief. He sat down and said, I knew it wasn't right. What he did to her. What we all let happen. I didn't say anything because I didn't know how to say it without everything falling apart. But if she's in court, if this is real, I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it. Marcus would go on to provide a sworn statement covering 14 years of observations. The inequality. The labor. The money that flowed through that house without reaching me. His own discomfort watching it. His own silence. He didn't do it for me. I think he did it for himself. But I was grateful for it anyway. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, though I was, a little. But because I kept thinking about the version of myself that had existed in that house for 18 years. The one who woke up early and made breakfast and gave away pieces of herself every single day and genuinely believed, that this was what gratitude looked like. That she had to earn her place. That her presence was a burden that required constant, quiet, exhausting payment. I sat at Deborah's kitchen table at 2 in the morning and thought, how long did I believe I deserved what was happening to me? How many years did I spend shrinking, apologizing, making myself useful so I wouldn't be sent away? And the answer was all of them. All 18 years. That didn't make me feel sad that night. It made me feel something sharper. Something that said, enough. Deborah came downstairs around 3. She didn't say anything. She just made 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me and stayed there until the sun came up. That's the thing about real support. It doesn't always look like speeches. Sometimes it just looks like not leaving. At 7 o'clock, I put on the clothes I had set out the night before. A gray blazer. Black trousers. My hair pulled back. I looked in the mirror and thought, you look like someone who belongs in that room. And I walked out the door. We are one step away from the moment that changes everything, and I need you to do something before we get there. Share this video. Right now. Send it to someone who needs to hear this story. Someone who was told to be grateful for being mistreated. Someone who stayed silent for years because they didn't know they had a voice. Comment below, I'm here for Nora. Let her know this community is real. The climax is moments away, and I promise you, the judge's words will stay with you for a very long time. Let's go. Family Court, Division 3. 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. The room smelled like old wood and recycled air and the particular kind of quiet that only exists in places where decisions get made about people's lives. Harold and I sat at the petitioner's table. Harold's paralegal, a composed young woman named Sasha, had the evidence files stacked in 4 color-coded sections. The video was loaded. The financial records were printed and flagged. Vincent arrived at 9:20 with a lawyer, the partner of a firm that handled his company's contracts. The man was used to property disputes and business negotiations. He was not, as it would turn out, prepared for this. Vincent saw me across the room. I watched his expression run through a quick sequence: surprise, then calculation, then the practiced composure of a man who believed he could talk his way through anything. He nodded at me, like we were colleagues who had a minor disagreement. I looked away and turned my attention to the front of the room. The Honorable Judge Sandra Okafor entered at precisely 9:30. She was a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the bearing of someone who had witnessed a great many people try to perform innocence in her presence. She sat, opened her file, reviewed the room briefly, and said, "We'll begin." Harold presented the case in sections. Clean. Unemotional. Precise. The kinship stipend records first. $133,000 designated for the welfare of Nora Caldera, paid to Vincent and Patricia over 18 years. Then the evidence of what my welfare actually looked like: medical records that stopped at age 13, no school activity documentation, financial contributions I had made from my own wages while still legally a dependent. Then Claire's footage. The judge watched it once. Just once. She didn't speak immediately. She made a note. Then the witness statements, Eleanor's written account, Jerome's testimony, and Marcus, who appeared in person and sat in the witness chair with his hands folded and his voice steady and said, calmly and clearly, that what he had observed in his own home over 14 years was not parenting. It was a system. And his sister had been at the bottom of it. Vincent's lawyer objected 3 times during Marcus's testimony. The judge overruled all 3. When it was Vincent's turn to respond, his lawyer presented the argument that the stipend had been used for housing, food, and basic necessities, the standard of care legally required. That the physical incident at the party was a moment of frustration and not a pattern. Harold asked Vincent one question on cross-examination. Mr. Caldera, can you provide any documentation, receipts, records, any evidence at all, showing that the funds designated for Nora's care were spent specifically on her welfare, rather than on household expenses your family would have incurred regardless of her presence? Vincent looked at his lawyer. His lawyer said nothing. No, Vincent said. Harold said, thank you. Nothing further. Judge Okafor did not take long to deliberate. She reviewed her notes, removed her reading glasses, and addressed the courtroom in a voice that was calm and entirely without doubt. The court has before it a documented financial record showing sustained receipt of public welfare funds designated for the care of a specific minor. The petitioner has presented credible evidence, in the form of financial records, witness testimony, documented labor history, and video evidence, that these funds were not applied in a manner consistent with their intended purpose. She looked at Vincent directly. The court further finds that the incident documented in the video evidence constitutes physical assault, committed publicly, against a 22-year-old woman who has spent the majority of her life in this respondent's household. This is not ambiguous. This is not a private family matter. This is a matter of public record and legal consequence. Vincent's jaw tightened. His lawyer was writing something. Patricia, who had come and sat in the back row and not spoken, pressed her hand over her mouth. The court orders restitution of the documented stipend amount, $133,840, to the State Welfare Office, which will establish a remediation trust in the petitioner's name. She continued. The court further refers this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential charges including financial exploitation of a ward and physical assault. The respondent is ordered to have no contact with the petitioner for a period of no less than 2 years, enforceable immediately. She set down her pen. This court exists to protect people. When it fails to protect a child, because information was hidden, because systems were gamed, because those who should have spoken stayed quiet, it has an obligation to respond when the truth finally surfaces. This court considers this obligation now discharged. Ruling stands. The gavel came down. I sat completely still for several seconds. Harold put his hand briefly on the table in front of me, not touching my hand, just near it. A gesture that said, "We did it." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in 18 years. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Patricia found me before I reached the exit. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her pearls were there, same as always. But something in her posture had collapsed. "Nora," she said. "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. But I am." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about all the times she had watched, said nothing, smoothed things over, called it keeping the peace. I thought about all the mornings she had poured herself a cup of tea while I made breakfast for a family I had never been allowed to feel part of. "I know you are," I said. "But sorry is where it starts. Not where it ends." And I walked past her and out through the main doors into the October light. In the months that followed, the district attorney's office opened a review. Vincent was formally charged with financial exploitation, a charge that carries serious weight when the victim is a former dependent. His property management company lost 2 major contracts when the story became public. The local newspaper ran a piece. It was not flattering. Patricia cooperated with investigators and received a reduced charge. She moved into her sister's home. Whether she and Vincent still speak, I don't know. I stopped needing to know. Marcus and I had coffee twice in the months after the hearing. Awkward, quiet coffee, full of the kind of silences that happen between people relearning how to be around each other honestly. He apologized. I told him the same thing I told Patricia, that's where it starts. I got my own apartment. A small one, on a street with trees. The kitchen window faces east, and in the mornings, when I'm making my own breakfast, for myself, on my own schedule, the light comes in golden quiet. I never take that for granted. I want to be very clear about something. This story is not about revenge. I know it might look that way from the outside, the restitution order, the criminal referral, the public exposure. But revenge would mean I wanted Vincent to suffer the way he made me suffer. I don't want that. I genuinely don't. What I wanted, what I still want, is simpler and harder to explain. I wanted the truth to be said out loud, in a room where it couldn't be denied. I wanted someone in authority to look at what had happened and say, "This was wrong, and it will not be covered over." That's not revenge. That's just the lights coming on. There is something I think about often now. I think about the version of myself at 14, at 16, at 19, who believed, truly believed, that she was lucky to have a roof over her head. Who thought gratitude meant silence. Who shrunk herself into usefulness because she was convinced that being useful was the price of belonging. I think about that girl. And I want to tell her, you were never lucky. You were generous. You were patient beyond what any child should have to be patient. You were capable and kind and strong, and none of those things were being valued. They were being used. There is a difference between being loved and being tolerated. Between being part of a family and being maintained by one. Between belonging and just being there. If you know that difference from the inside, if you've lived in that space between what you were told and what you felt, I want you to hear this. You were not the problem. You were never the problem. The people who made you feel that your presence had to be earned, that your needs were inconvenient, that you should be grateful for being treated as less than, they were wrong. And you don't have to keep paying the bill for their mistakes. A single slap at a birthday party started all of this. But really, what started it was the moment I decided not to explain myself. Not to apologize for the gift. Not to make it smaller so he would feel bigger. I just stood there and felt the decision form. If you're still waiting for your moment, I hope this story is the thing that tells you, it's already here. You don't need permission. You don't need a perfect plan or $100,000 in evidence or a building full of witnesses. You just need to decide. And then take one step toward the door. My name is Nora. And for the first time in my life, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Thank you for staying until the very end of Nora's story. If this moved you, if it made you feel angry, or seen, or a little bit braver than you were an hour ago, do 3 things right now. 1. Subscribe. Every day, we bring you another story of someone who chose truth over silence. 2. Share this video. Because somewhere, right now, someone is sitting in a house that doesn't feel like home, and they need to know there is a way through. 3. Leave a comment. Tell us your name. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us what you're carrying. This community reads every single one. You are not alone. You were never alone. And justice, real justice, starts the moment you stop looking down. Until next time, take good care of yourselves.